We are back. Welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that we are all living in a modern day spiritual paradise. I am your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, sometimes pioneer, but the only part I truly claim is that part where I was a kid raised in Jehovah's Witnesses in the 70s and the 80s. And as I always do, based on some comments I'm seeing on YouTube, I want to warn you, we try to have some fun. We try to heal with each episode of this show, but it does feature sarcasm, some laughs, some humor, my own brand of dumb, never meant to offend anyone. And I always like to get that out there early and often, just in case someone is in a delicate position. But we are going to tackle, as we often do, a fun subject this week. And I guess the only way to really say that is we're going to have some laughs because I don't know any other way to even tackle this one. But I want to be sure that everyone hears me say this. It's actually a truly serious subject. We laugh at it, and at different levels or different times of life, it could be somewhat funny. But the truth is, as we wind this thing down towards the end, you will see that it's really a serious subject. You might be asking, what is that subject? Well, I believe the time has come to discuss what I think is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, of problems that I witnessed, dealt with, saw, heard, listened to. I'm even going to say here that I participated in among Jehovah's Witnesses. And that problem is alcohol, booze, you know, drinking, getting drunk, buzzed, tipsy, any phrase you want to attach to this subject. We're going to dive into the bottle, pun intended, and we're going to talk about alcohol and booze among Jehovah's Witnesses. And in my time as a Jehovah's Witness, from the time I was a kid, a young kid, all the way up through my 11 years as an elder, I watched many, many Jehovah's Witnesses getting drunk. I saw it many times. I saw it at all levels of my life, at all ages. So let's talk about it. And and as I mentioned, this is going to include my own time as a teenager, including before and after baptism. As I often do on this little podcast, I throw myself under the bus because I feel like the best way to talk about sensitive subjects is to include not only what was witnessed and observed, but what I may have partook in within reason or have my own stories on, my own experiences. So starting there, getting hammered was one of those imaginary lines for my generation, for teenagers at that time. It was one of those things that we knew we shouldn't be doing, but it wasn't that bad, right? So we would literally seek it out from the time we were teenagers, probably late junior high, high school. It, we'd seek it out every weekend if we could. We were looking to party. We were looking to have fun. And to me, that says a lot about the Jehovah's Witness culture at that time. And frankly, even today, it's that it falls in that bucket that many have heard me say on this silly show that I refer to as Jehovah's Witness a la carte. It's a Jehovah's Witness a la carte thinking mechanism. I've talked about it, as I mentioned, many times here. Picking and choosing what will follow, what we won't follow, what we think is really bad, serious sin, what we know is sin, but hey, we don't need to talk about it or tell anyone. Alcohol falls into that category for Jehovah's Witnesses. And again, starting back when I started to drink alcohol and was a kid and a teenager, which I do not recommend, underlined a million times for anyone listening, I often would compare it emotionally or mentally to drugs. And as a Jehovah's Witness, at least in my generation, drugs were straight from Satan. You were going to sit at the table and do drugs. just Satan was at the table. I mean, it was seen as evil. It was seen as bad. We didn't do it. None of the kids I grew up with. And that includes even marijuana or pot, which was very, very popular at that time among kids our age. We simply stayed away from anything that remotely fell under the umbrella of drugs. But we found a way mentally, emotionally, and culturally in Jehovah's Witnesses to minimize getting hammered on the weekend. It's a brain bender because as we will see, the Bible openly condemns drunkenness, but we did it anyway. And we did it a lot when we were kids. And as I take this trip, I will lead from my own stupidity as a teenage guy all the way up through the elder years. But it was always a bit of a brain bender to me. It was that Jehovah's Witness a la carte mentality. The Bible openly condemns drunkenness. It doesn't even mention drugs, marijuana, or anything else. And we never dreamed of taking them. We knew it was bad. It really puts a spotlight on what a strange and bizarre cultural piece of Jehovah's Witnesses this subject is. And we see that kind of bizarre thinking in almost every category you would label as a social interaction or something that's cultural, social behavior, things of that nature. Something that we're blatantly not supposed to do, we keep doing it. Something that's not even mentioned in the Bible, that's so evil. Very strange, a brain bender. So, going back to myself on this issue of alcohol, and at least where my life experience started with it as a Jehovah's Witness kid, I ran around with a pack of Jehovah's Witness guys. We were very close group of about 5 guys. Went to different congregations. We'd get together. We'd drive across the river in this city. We would find ways for us to hang out together. Got into lots of trouble, subject for another show. But every weekend literally featured how we were going to get alcohol, how we were going to get booze. The 80s were a wild time. Might I add, they were fun. A great generation that is in no way condoning getting booze if you were a kid. That's horrible. Okay. We got lucky, period. Getting serious for a minute. But we would candidly drink. We'd oftentimes go to meeting hungover, especially the Sunday morning meeting, spending the night at your buddy's house, that brother across town. We sneak out, we would drink. We would then go to meeting with the smell probably still on our breath, which is insane. But I'll dive into what I consider a drinking culture among Jehovah's Witnesses in a few minutes. But in my opinion, in the Western world of Jehovah's Witnesses, based on my own experiences, not anyone else's, I think that alcohol, getting drunk, and drinking is an intrinsic part of daily life among many, not all, not making a blanket statement, but among many Jehovah's Witnesses. And that imaginary line that I mentioned didn't just apply to dumb teenage guys. I saw that imaginary line of being allowed to drink without it being measurable or something in the spotlight. I saw that in action among many Jehovah's Witnesses, and that includes leadership. And as we are about to dive into, you'll see that includes the governing body, past leaders of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and elders, including circuit overseers that I served with, became acquainted with, or had experiences with. So that is a very long-winded way of saying that, in my humble opinion, drinking, getting drunk, and alcoholism is by far the number one problem among Jehovah's Witnesses during my time as a Jehovah's Witness. So let's take a look at this thing called alcohol and the imaginary line that lives, doesn't live, whatever you want to attach to that among the culture of the Dubs. But in order to do so, and as we often do here, we got to go back to the beginning, right? So if you're new to this podcast and you are a Jehovah's Witness, or you're someone just curious about Jehovah's Witnesses, they claim, and I really underline that, they claim that the Bible, particularly theirs, the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, is literally the foundation stone by which they live their life. They make every decision. So let's take a look at that book. Let's go all the way back to the beginning and see if we can discern how or why, or even maybe why, a Jehovah's Witness might make an imaginary line or seem to look the other way when it comes to drinking and alcohol. We wonder why getting drunk, getting buzzed, tipsy, over drinking, or all things alcohol are such a problem among Jehovah's Witnesses. It helps to take a look at the history of overindulging among Jehovah's people from the beginning. So you guessed it. Let's take a look. We're going to open that book, the New World Translation, their version of the Bible. And I will just say right from the outset that men of faith, great men of faith, got hammered. They liked their alcohol. Let's take a look at a few examples. Here's a favorite, and here's a guy that I've probably talked a lot about on this show, and I'm starting to wonder why even myself, but he's such an interesting character. Let's talk about Noah. Noah, mentioned as a man of faith at Hebrews 11 and verse 7, so he's put on a pedestal as a guy we should all emulate, had at least one incident, guessing not the first, where he overindulged in alcohol. But in the ongoing bizarre storyline of the ark builder and closet zoologist, we get this story in Genesis chapter 9, where Noah gets bombed, he gets naked, his son Ham just happens to walk in and see his dad in the nude. He leaves the tent, tells his brothers, who then walk in backwards with a giant cloth or something to cover him up, being certain they didn't look at dad in the nude. Unfortunately, Ham, and by extension Canaan, the people who came from him, get cursed for all time for just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time by walking into the tent of their dad Noah to find an old drunk dude laying there. We don't honestly know from the account in Genesis chapter 9 if Noah had a drinking problem. It doesn't allude to it because, frankly, the entire story of the ark builder, zoologist, and now heavy drinker Noah just suddenly ends a couple of verses later after this incident. It simply states he got hammered. His one son saw him in the buff. The other guys covered him up. He lived another 350 years and he's gone. That's it. There's the story of Noah. But when you look at this account, which is just a couple verses that you're absolutely intrigued are even in there, again, here we go into the dark chambers of Stacy's mind as a kid and as a grown adult, even one serving the congregation in those days. I couldn't help but think, who wouldn't want to have a few stiff drinks after waiting first 500 years to have sex, having to build a giant box he'd never heard of or seen before, walking the planet Earth to collect animals for 40 years while living in their piles of crap out at sea for a year, then walking off this ark after a year of that to step over thousands and thousands of dead bodies all over the place. Ah, yes, Noah. But apparently, as this account tells us, he liked a stiff drink and he liked to drop his pants in his own tent. So bizarre. It's just bizarre. And might I just add that the Bible, by extension, Jehovah, has a lot to say about this issue of getting hammered. And not just getting hammered, but getting naked. Apparently having a drink and getting naked is really, really bad. I don't get it. But as we extend past Noah's bad incident that we still can't figure out why a God of love would want to be sure we all knew about, we go to Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 15, which is certain to strike fear in anyone who is a Jehovah's Witness, where it says, quote, "Woe to the one who gives his companions something to drink, adding to its rage and anger to make them drunk in order to look on their nakedness." End quote. Woe to the guy or girl that gives a friend a drink and drops their drawers. Apparently, it is a very serious sin in the eyes of Jehovah. Might be why we got a glimpse at Noah after all the man had been through. He couldn't even have something to drink and lay naked in private. But Jehovah made sure through the minor prophet Habakkuk, to make sure that we didn't try it either. So, example one on drinking. And, well, we'll get to that. Let's move on to another example, which is look, how do I make even fun or jokes about this? We've talked about this on the show before, but it's just an incredible example on so many levels. How about the righteous man Lot, who also apparently liked the bottle? At 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 7 in the New World Translation, we learn that Lot is a righteous man. He is righteous in Jehovah's eyes, despite getting bombed and having sex with his two daughters. I don't even want to touch that, so we're not going to. But as 2 Peter 2:7 is recorded for our benefit, it says, quote, "And he rescued righteous Lot, who was greatly distressed by the brazen conduct of the lawless people," end quote. Here referring to Sodom and Gomorrah. This is after Lot, again, gave up his own daughters to be gang raped, then got hammered by his daughters. So much to unpack there, we're not going to, but then has sex with both of them. I just want to point out, because I'm not going to touch that anymore, it's so repulsive, that these two are held up as men of faith and righteous for a Jehovah's Witness that cracks open the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures. It's also held up as a great example for kids that are Jehovah's Witnesses, as there's Bible story books where they can look at pictures of these great men. And oddly enough, those couple of details are left out of the kids' book, and for that, I am thankful. But it gets worse in so many ways, because in your mind, you're thinking to yourself, is it any wonder Jehovah's Witnesses view drinking in a strange way? They have an imaginary line they feel like they can cross. It just gets better. Insight Book, Volume 1, pages 656 to 657, under the subheading, "Why does the Bible talk about such men as Noah and Lot getting intoxicated?" That's a damn good question. Thank you, faithful and discreet slave. Can't wait to hear your answer. Or can we? Here's the answer. Quote, "Several instances of drunkenness are mentioned in the Bible when such incidents throw light on some important matter." What? "Thus it relates that after the flood, Noah planted a vineyard." That's really important, don't you agree? "He began drinking of the wine and became intoxicated. This happening is recorded in the scriptures to show how Noah's curse on Canaan came to be uttered." In another case, on two different nights, okay. In another case, on two different nights, Lo- Lot's two daughters gave him so much wine that he became drunk and they had sexual relations with him. This account enlightens us on the origin of the nations of Moab and Ammon and their relationship to Israel. Lot was evidently drunk enough to lose control of his good sense, but not dead drunk, that is, not too drunk to have sexual relations. Since God's word so strongly condemns drunkenness, we can be sure that these righteous men were not habitual in drinking to excess, were not drunkards. End quote. Where do I begin? That is from the Insight Book, now defunct. You remember the two-part big green volumes. This was volume 1, page 656, 657, if you'd like to read it and you're a Jehovah's Witness. We are told from the faithful and discreet slave, by extension, and now completely confirmed as the 8 guys in upstate New York, known as the governing body, that these 2 men of faith were great guys. They didn't seem to make a habit of it. How they know that, no one knows. That they're only recorded to give us really important information, like how Canaan came about and how Moab and Ammon came about. But it provides details about being naked that on 2 different nights, I want to make a joke there, I just can't. Lot ramped up to drink himself blind and have sex with his daughters. Thank you, governing body. Glad Lot could still perform sexually while hammered, and that we can just dismiss Noah getting bombed in favor of learning about Canaan's curse, which we all know in detail, right? What? It's incredible. This is inspired of God in Jehovah's photo album for you and I, that we must know, read, and know front and back in order to survive the impending fireball rainstorm coming at Armageddon. Good to know. Thank you for letting us know that Lot could still perform sexually with his own kids after getting hammered drunk, and that Noah couldn't have a drink and lie naked in private in his own bed. It's insane. And I want to laugh about it. But the fact remains that if you're a Jehovah's Witness, this is your reference point. These men are called men of faith and righteous. So, as a child in Jehovah's Witnesses, I watched Jehovah's Witness adults getting buzzed at almost every get-together. Is that still a phrase, buzzed? I'm showing my age here. It was literally common. So I remember as a kid at one get-together, it was an outdoor thing. I found myself wondering why Jehovah didn't just include the command to not get bombed in the 10 Commandments. A kid was thinking this, and granted, I'm starting to realize I was a weird kid. But even later on, I remember sitting in a Kingdom Hall one Sunday thinking, even Jesus made sure that the wine was flowing at weddings. So there's that. Alcohol seems to be an intrinsic part, and I don't want to get into the culture of the Middle East or all of the surrounding nations, subject for another day. Again, this is all supposed to be guiding Jehovah's Witnesses today out of the holy book created by Jehovah himself. So why even mention these stories? Why would I go back and even bring up 2 ridiculously bad, let's be honest, truly repulsive examples of grown men getting drunk? Certainly Lot. I can't even get into that or make a funny. I bring up these stories because as an elder, when counseling people on getting drunk, drinking, bombed, buzzed, tipsy, elders would point to these ridiculous stories to comfort the drinker. That's right. And let's call it what it is. Their sacred book mentions these men and holds them up as people we should model our lives after, despite getting hammered and even committing disgusting, repulsive acts. Therefore, it's an excellent reference point for what I think is a much more fascinating issue, which is the subliminal dismissal of a person's drinking problem or habits in the minds of a Jehovah's Witness. And trust me, I've seen this on judicial committees. I've seen people that were closet drunks. I've seen elders and their families, as we'll get into, that were drunks. And they can still be held up as a man of faith, as a shepherd in the congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, on the stage at a district convention or a circuit assembly, baptizing people on Saturdays. Wild, huh? All of this because Jehovah included it in his photo album of life for all of us to reference and base our lives on. And reference it they do. Trust me, they are fast and easy to dismiss. This whole easy to dismiss mentality is what drives the drinking culture, certainly among, in my experience, and I underline that, Western Jehovah's Witnesses. But you may be, as some of the comments I see on this podcast on social media, maybe think, come on, Stacy, old stories. There's probably a certain segment of us, this podcast host included, that doesn't believe some of these people ever even existed. They certainly are fascinating stories, though, even more so that Jehovah wanted to make sure we knew them. You may be thinking that's in the past. That's old light. That's old information. So let's come up to modern times in this issue of drinking and alcohol among Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's race past the holy book and let's bring it right into today, the most critical time in human history, the last days of the last days of those last days. So, moving from the great men of the past, men of faith and righteousness that like themselves a stiff drink now and then and to drop their pants, apparently. And let's bring it into modern day men of faith who also, by no small coincidence, seem to love themselves a good stiff drink. I want to start with who I think is probably, I don't know, some of these governing body guys today are giving them a race for their money. But I want to start with who I think is probably one of the most colorful people in Jehovah's Witness history, which is Judge Joseph Rutherford. What a character. I've often said I would love to see a movie about this guy's life. What an absolute racist, misogynistic clown. But what many Jehovah's Witnesses don't know is that Judge Rutherford had a lot to say about booze and alcohol. Keep in mind that the judge, Judge Joe, was handpicked by Jesus to lead all of mankind. He was even the guy that came up with the name Jehovah's Witnesses. But what very few people comment on or even know among the faith is that Joe was a drunk. Joe liked himself alcohol. Jesus approved, as Jehovah's Witnesses will tell you. He was a notorious drunk. He was so enamored with a good drink that under inspiration from Jesus, he wrote about it. Here are some of my favorite snapshots from the judge, Joseph Rutherford, and by no means are these the full library of snapshots, just a few from Jesus' handpicked servant. Let's start with the Watchtower of November 1st, 1924. Under inspiration from Jesus himself, as the governing body will tell 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses, the judge made sure that this was captured as spiritual food at the right time from the faithful slave. In what I think is, this is a downright incredible slice of Holy Spirit. This article goes on a rant, a diatribe against prohibition in the 20s and 30s in the United States, because apparently this was on the mind of King Jesus. It says, quote, November 1st, 1924, Watchtower. The devil stands for all things evil. He is the very personification of wickedness. Then, how could prohibition of intoxicating liquor be the devil's scheme? Paul answers, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light, end quote. Oh no. Joe wanted all of Jehovah's Witnesses to know that prohibition was just a scheme of Satan. Intoxicating liquor shouldn't be controlled by the devil. Satan was responsible for cleaning out the judge's liquor cabinet. But he just kept going on the subject of prohibition, writing an entire book in 1930, still available if you're a Jehovah's Witness listening and in doubt, called Prohibition and the League of Nations. Apparently, we are to believe, as you look at this material, and you can find it with some effort, that Jehovah and Jesus were very concerned about what was going on with alcohol in the United States. They took a little time off from saving people from the impending genocide they were preaching about to be sure that everyone knew, damn it, they had a right to drink alcohol. If you can find even some snapshots from the 1930 book called Prohibition and the League of Nations by Jesus' chosen servant, Judge Joseph Rutherford, I highly recommend it. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into some of the quotes, one of which I already read, that Satan is behind prohibition, but I can assure you, it will leave you scratching your head on many, many levels as to why the one voice that was supposed to be leading all of us away from impending genocide was infatuated with alcohol. It turns out I have some answers on that question. Many Jehovah's Witnesses aren't aware of who was, quite frankly, famous or infamous watchtower lawyer during that century, during those decades, named Olin Boyle. I recommend a Jehovah's Witness listening to go back and look at the works of Olin Boyle, some of which is captured in print, as I'm about to share with you. Olin Boyle started to have some problems with the judge, Joseph Rutherford, and his whole makeup in what is the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society that Jehovah's Witnesses are now a part of, under, of course, Jesus' leadership in the 8 Guys in New York. As it turns out, Olin Boyle, as an attorney, might have had some things to say about the drinking culture at that time in Brooklyn, Bethel, at a time when Jesus, again, I want to remind everyone, and the only reason I share all this nonsense, at a time when Jesus apparently looked all over the entire planet and said, I really like that guy, Joe Rutherford. He's my guy. From the works of Olin Boyle, which is a matter of court record, if you're a Jehovah's Witness thinking this is some wild apostate podcast telling you false made up things, some references. Watchtower Bible and Tract Society lawyer Olin Boyle's original letter to Rutherford, which is dated 7/21/1939, Exhibit 4, in the Moyle transcript that claims that, quote, under Rutherford's tutelage, there has grown up a glorification of alcohol and condemnation of total abstinence at Bethel, mentioning several experiences he had at Bethel along these lines that, quote, one can't be a real Bethelite without drinking beer, end quote, and which said specifically to Rutherford, quote, you have publicly labeled total abstainers as prudes and therefore must assume your share of responsibility for the Bacchus-like attitude exhibited by members of the family. You can find this at pages 1736 to 1737 of the Olin Boyle court transcript. Apparently, Judge, and this matter of alcohol, and I want to harken back to the imaginary line where witnesses think they can cross it to get a little buzzed. That all started at World Headquarters. He refers to the judge as like Bacchus, the Greek god of wine and booze, and says that people that wouldn't get down and get hammered with him were prudes. But it continues. Pages 361 and 362. Actually, back it up to page 359 through 362. Read it all. It's a gem. The testimony of Olin Boyle, who related some of the things said by the boys in the elevators. This is at Brooklyn Bethel. Quote, the boys would remark there, make allusions, wish they had a barrel of beer around. How nice it would be to have a barrel of beer. Who described new Bethelites being broken into the habit of drinking beer. Who mentioned the frequent use of beer and, quote, stronger stuff by the factory staff in the evening, and who related an incident in which an intoxicated factory worker rang an alarm bell late at night as a joke. But here's my favorite. Olin Boyle, the gift that keeps giving. You got to love an attorney who's willing to share. The letter by Canadian branch overseer Walter Salter to Rutherford, dated 4/1/1937, and mentioned in the May 5th, 1937 issue of the Golden Age, slice of Holy Spirit, that declared that, quote, I, at your orders, would purchase cases of whiskey at $60 a case and cases of brandy and other liquors, to say nothing of untold cases of beer. A bottle or two of liquor would not do. It was for the president, and nothing was too good for the president. He was heaven's favorite. Why should he not have everything that would gratify his desire for comfort? End quote. If you're taking notes, Canadian Branch Overseer Walter Salter, in something that apparently was shared in the Golden Age of May 5th, 1937. He was a liquor broker for, again, heaven's favorite, the president, Judge Joseph Rutherford, handpicked by the same Jesus Christ you read about in the Gospels. But again, you may be saying, okay, Stacy, on this matter of drinking and Jehovah's Witnesses, okay, we knocked out the patriarchs in the Bible. We've knocked out past presidents / faithful slaves / governing body people of the past. They didn't have that name nonetheless. Surely the modern day governing body has gotten new light in reference to boozing it up, right? They would never do this. That Judge Joe. Thank God no one walked into his Bethel room and he had dropped his pants and then they were cursed for walking in by accident like Noah. But if you're thinking that the modern day governing body has a different viewpoint on alcohol among modern day Jehovah's Witnesses, I present to you what has now become an absolutely famous incident known as Bottlegate by some activists, where governing body member and easily the most caustic personality that Jesus chose for the 8 guys in upstate New York, Tony Morris, otherwise known as Anthony Morris, who was caught on video in 2019 in a liquor store buying bottle after bottle of expensive whiskeys and scotches. The video, if you haven't seen it, can be found online and features one of the judges of all mankind giving his expertise on liquor to a complete stranger. As I watched it for the first time, I, of course, was laughing my ass off at his cart filled with booze and couldn't help but wonder how he was paying for it. Donations, anyone? But as is the case with the way I think, I found myself wondering why he didn't stop shopping liquor, even for just a few precious seconds, to informally witness about the kingdom and save the life of this complete stranger that walked up to him and wanted his advice on liquor. I mean, we go knock on doors hour after hour. We can't find anyone to talk to us. This guy walked up to him, Christ's brother. Can you take a few minutes to save my life from the impending genocide about to hit this planet at your hands any day? No, Tony couldn't be bothered with that as a member of the 8 guys in upstate New York and Christ's handpicked dudes. He continued to give him advice on booze. And this, might I add, always really landed with me and shocked me that this was on a Sunday morning. A Sunday morning. Again, why isn't this man's entire day built around saving people's lives? That's what he talks about. Nope, I'm shopping booze right now. Oh, while Jesus watches on. The same guy that is on video meetings, courtesy of their studio, telling Jehovah's Witnesses they're blood guilty and will be split open like hot dogs at Armageddon if their life doesn't revolve around saving every soul they meet in the ministry. But Tony Morris, handpicked by Christ, is just too concerned with making sure his basket fills up with the right whiskeys and scotches. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness listening and you're offended, why? Why? This man claims to have control over every phase and facet of your life, over the every phase and facet of the lives of every breathing soul on this planet. But he can't be bothered with witnessing to a man who walked up to him friendly because he's too busy shopping liquor. I don't even want to know how he paid for it. I don't want to know. It's truly incredible. Okay. I pick on those 8 guys a lot, don't I? How about elders in the congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses today? I will just say, and again, my name is out there, this podcast is out there, and I loved many of the people deeply that I served with in many different roles throughout my time as a witness, good people. But it would be absolutely dishonest to not share with whoever might listen to this that the elders I served with and the elder bodies I served on had several notorious drinkers. Notorious. They were down to earth. They were good guys, but they overdrank a lot. And oftentimes their lives look like it and their bodies look like it, their health. I in no way tell stories to speak disparagingly of people I loved at one time or even now or I associated with. I can only give honest stories to illustrate the point. Many elders that I served with were good, kind people, but they're flawed. They're flawed. All of us are, just like all of us. But I have so many stories with elders, their wives, publishers, friends, all getting drunk, getting buzzed, getting tipsy. We simply don't have the time in what is likely to be a long episode warning halfway through to cover them all. So I'm just going to share a couple of examples of what I personally lived through in this matter of alcohol among Jehovah's Witnesses. At the outset, I'll go back to my childhood, the teenage years. I mentioned the pack of guys I ran around with as teenagers. 2 of those guys were biological brothers and had great parents. I truly, truly loved them. Good people. Dad was an elder, good man, high stress guy, intense, but he was an elder. He was a good man who looked out for us as teenage guys. But one night, after me, their sons, and several other of our buddies that hung around together, after we'd been out drinking, we snuck back into the house to crash, spend the night there. And I never forget coming through the garage door and all the way up the hallway from the bathroom all the way leading back to the master bedroom were several pools of vomit every few feet. We knew who it was. A wonderful man who happened to be an elder, judging others. But we knew he drank, and we knew he drank a lot. At one point in my time as a Jehovah's Witness, I had people from a neighboring congregation coming to see me across town because they couldn't go to their own elder body or book study conductor at the time to confess a sin due to the fact that the publisher would often get hammered with their book study conductor and several of the elders of that congregation. This person just wanted to unload a sin from many years in the past that he had committed, guess what, while drunk, but couldn't do it in his home congregation because the elders in that congregation were known to love their booze. And they drank themselves blind with him. And look, if you want to judge what it means to drink yourself blind, to get drunk, if you're feeling any effects of alcohol, buzzing, tipsy, anything, you can't drive a car. You go to jail in some cases. So certainly if you're looking at it from a spiritual or moral standpoint, you can't even immediately dismiss that. Well, I wasn't falling down drunk. You don't have to be intoxicated. I don't want to get into the science of it. We're grown adults here. In the case of that one person who I loved very much, still love, don't talk to anymore, obviously. I told them to go their way and sin no more. It had been years since they had committed the sin he wanted to confess. See past episode on confessing sins to elders, never do it. This led to a much bigger story in my life I'll share down the road. I'll move on past that. But incidentally, that brother's book study conductor was a notorious drinker. It was known in the circuit. It was known in the circuit. In fact, at one time at a Jehovah's Witness wedding, he attempted to kiss my ex-wife. Now, if anyone had known me back in those days, I the Italian blood, burns hot, and that was about to send him through a sheetrock wall. But despite that, I humbled myself at the hands of my fellow elders, and they did absolutely nothing to him. He kept serving as an elder, judging other people, kids, teenagers with problems. There are so many problems like that, or stories, excuse me, with this problem that I could share, and we simply don't have time. But I hope by just sharing a couple, you see that this is a systemic thing. I didn't have a rare life. I'm in the United States of America. This is common. I had friends across the country, all the way back to, at that time, Brooklyn, Bethel. Drinking and getting drunk, even for those that were servants, is not uncommon. I don't want to say it's common or it's every single brother, because that wouldn't be true. That wouldn't be true. But is it more common than you think? Oh, yeah, it most definitely is. There are so many of these stories. I'm remembering one, including another elder that I served with who had too much to drink, was drunk at a wedding, and he tried to come on to another brother's wife. That ended up into a closed door meeting that we privately counseled on. I have so many horrible, horrific stories of drunks, baptized Jehovah's Witnesses that abuse their wives and kids while under the influence of alcohol. And in every single case I can remember, either nothing was done or it was handled with private reproof. But I'll tell you, kind of focusing in here for a few minutes on the elder years, that decade, a little more that I was an elder. I think the one that was really damaging in the congregations that I was in was how notorious the elders' wives were for drinking. It just became so commonplace, so expected, because as we all know, if you've been associated with Jehovah's Witnesses for any amount of time, the sisters, the women, are truly the heartbeat of the congregation. They're not treated like that. They're treated terrible. But a congregation's personality can certainly be affected and encouraged or discouraged by the women in there. And it's no more so is that true than with the wives of elders, of servants. And it was by far the saddest part of my experience as a Jehovah's Witness elder, that and children, as I've talked to many times here, and the crimes against them. In one of the congregations I served in, the elders' wives loved their wine. And like I mentioned, it was widely known. And again, without getting into the culture of an elder body, which is going to be a subject for an entire episode here, oddly enough, I always hate saying this because it just comes out sounding terrible, but elder bodies have personalities. There's archetypes. We'll discuss that down the road. And at that time, I was probably the youngest elder. I was also a little more tuned into cultural and common trends. I was also seen as the one that would listen. I was more loving. And so I became the go-to elder for many people. But trust me, no ego in that. It burned me out fast, burned me out. But the endless discussions that I had to listen to, particularly with other sisters in the congregation, about the elders' wives and over drinking, it was exhausting. If you think I'm exaggerating, I can only tell you I'm not. I can't imagine anyone listening to this didn't witness the elders' wives rolling out a couple cases of wine and making sure they cross that imaginary line when it comes to drinking in the culture of Jehovah's Witnesses and getting buzzed, tipsy, loud, laughing, you name it. I always knew when there was going to be a baby shower in the congregation, not because I was invited, guys don't get invited, but I would hear about it, and then the calls came, and I started to get hit with calls and requests for private conversations soon after the baby shower. The elders' wives would often host or show up with a small vineyard in tow. Look, I cared about these women. Good people, just flawed. It was obvious to me that several of the elders' wives clearly suffered from depression, struggled with mental illnesses, not funny on any level. They literally couldn't function outside the Kingdom Hall or field service without bottles of alcohol. It always worried me. And when other publishers would want to discuss it privately, it usually ended with me having to go talk to their husbands, my fellow elder bro, privately, and it ended there. It would always end there. Because, headship and women have no rights thing, and the drinking continued. Nothing would get solved, even if it was a matter of health or if it was something serious or something we were concerned about. The alcohol flowed. And with one in particular, who was a wonderful person, but clearly struggled with some things, I sensed she was oftentimes buzzed or tipsy at meetings. Truly. So I would endure these kinds of conversations. I'd endure it for people close to me who were adamantly against alcohol with Jehovah's Witnesses, but the elders' wives, at least in the circuit, the congregation, the area I was an elder in, really struggled with alcohol. And so did their husbands. And at times when I would go to them very privately, as I always did to try to get our hands around this thing and keep it private and not embarrassing, the husbands would dismiss it. They would say there's no way for anyone to tell who's buzzed, and it would go into the vault and disappear. But I mean to tell you, culturally, as a Jehovah's Witness, other sisters would get so offended. But that's the thing with alcohol and this booze culture among Jehovah's Witnesses. They always dismiss it, this imaginary line. They always dismiss it as you just got it wrong. I was just happy. I was having fun. I wasn't buzzed. And outside having a breathalyzer next to the contribution box in a Kingdom Hall, there was no way to prove it. It can be denied. And as you might imagine, their elder husband worked overtime to dismiss it. Not only because he didn't want the headache, he certainly didn't want to deal with his wife's issues. He certainly didn't want his qualifications as an elder called into question because he wasn't presiding over his household in a fine manner. His wife likes to drink. They would simply dismiss it into the vault and gone, disappear. This culture is alive and well among Jehovah's Witnesses. If anyone listening thinking this is just some apostate, mentally diseased wacko who has an axe to grind, I can assure you it's just not true. Got no axe to grind, not invested in it at all. But in my time as a Jehovah's Witness, from child to elder, I can tell you it was a serious, serious problem. It was the most serious problem. And drinking was more serious, and the alcoholic culture among Western Jehovah's Witnesses was the most serious because it affected men and women. If I had to pick another problem that I thought was quickly becoming an epidemic among Jehovah's Witnesses in the West, I'd probably pick pornography. But that tends to only hit the men for the most part. But this issue of drinking, when you're somewhere under this kind of pressure on a day-to-day basis, Jehovah's Witnesses have developed an imaginary line that they feel like they can cross, despite the Bible's overt command against drunkenness. They feel like they can inch up and across it pretty safely and go about their daily lives. And the interesting thing about this issue of drinking among Jehovah's Witnesses is that this truly is a judicial matter. It's something you can be disfellowshipped for. Did I see it? No. Lots of people disfellowshipped in my time as an elder. I've openly stated I was the chairman of so many committees, I lost track of them. I saw people disfellowship certainly for everything sexual. That's 90% of every meeting. I saw it for smoking. I saw it for many things. I never saw it for drinking. Not once. But I can tell you the most conversations I had were on two subjects: marital problems and drinking. And so Jehovah's Witnesses know they can do this behind closed doors. There's that line. And so the culture literally breeds this. It borderline encourages drinking because those in leadership positions are doing it, oftentimes outside the lines. But it's judicial. If you take a look at the current Shepherd the Flock of God book, the 2022 edition, drinking or over drinking or drunkenness is a judicial matter. Under the chapter entitled Determining Whether a Judicial Committee Should Be Formed in this book, chapter 12, one of the things listed is drunkenness. And I want to read from you what the Elder's Handbook says. Keep in mind that some of the elders holding this handbook themselves get drunk. But it says this under drunkenness, quote, a judicial committee is required when there is a practice of drunkenness or a single incident of drunkenness that brings notoriety. So right there, I can tell you, end quote for the moment, I can tell you that there's some key words and whiskers in there, some traps. Practice, like how many times have you been drunk, Brother Jones, Sister whoever? Or if someone saw you hammered off your ass in public and it became the talk of the town. Oh, now you're embarrassing the congregation and the body of elders. Judicial committee. It goes on to say, back to the reference in the Shepherd book, quote, a scriptural description of drunkenness can be found in the following references, long list of scriptures. Goes on to say, if an individual confesses to an elder that on one occasion he overindulged in alcohol to the point of drunkenness in a private setting, such as his home, and there is no notoriety, it may suffice for the elder to give strong counsel. In any case, the elder should inform the coordinator of the body of elders of the matter. All kinds of parameters not taught anywhere in the Holy Scriptures that suddenly apply to the life of a Jehovah's Witness. They got drunk once. They were in private. My only question is, were they naked? Because that's apparently a big deal to Jehovah. See Noah and Habakkuk. But you'll note that it's littered with little secret doors that you can exit out of if you've been getting drunk or you've gotten drunk. The Bible does not comment on how to handle drunkenness, folks. It does say that elders shouldn't be over drinkers. It actually says that in the qualifications of what an elder or a ministerial servant should be. But it doesn't go into detail outside of this men of faith thing that we tackled at the beginning about getting hammered naked. And we're told to emulate these guys, as I mentioned. But it's important to note that despite it not telling you what to do, you could be disfellowshipped for getting drunk. And it's comical. Aside from the dangers of drinking, you could be disfellowshipped, have your life whipped away from you for getting drunk. Now, is that funny? That's not the funny part. The funny part is almost everybody's doing it and looking the other way. Looking the other way. As I've already shared a story of those that couldn't go to their elders because they got hammered with them. But let me emphasize this one point. You've already seen what an elder's taught from the Shepherd book, from the faithful slave. Then, might I add, as I like to do, that includes Tony Morris. He of liquor store fame. It includes Judge Joseph Rutherford, the former president who gave the name Jehovah's Witnesses, who's now in heaven, according to witness beliefs, helping guide the 8 guys in upstate New York. Let me emphasize this. It is rarely, if ever, dealt with in a congregation. Why? If you're just curious and you're listening, or if you're a Jehovah's Witness, it should be obvious by now. Many, including the governing body themselves and elders, like their booze. It's often stated that we can't tell if someone is drunk in most cases. And then there's this great disclaimer about getting drunk in private in that reference, that you're likely confessing to an elder who, wait for it, may be getting drunk in private himself or his wife is. So you ask, why is this rarely handled in the congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses? Because outside an accident in an automobile or falling down drunk at a wedding, and I've already told you of 2 instances where elders were trying to kiss other women, other married women, but unless they fall down on the dance floor, like the roof crashes down on them and it becomes this notorious thing about brother so-and-so was hammered last weekend, it all gets brushed under the rug, thereby fostering this culture of alcohol drinking that you see among Jehovah's Witnesses. It took me so many years to understand that because I couldn't understand it. It's like the issue of gluttony that I brought up here before. The Bible's pretty black and white on it. Don't do it, but we do it. It's Christianity a la carte, pick and choose. Oh my God, someone got a piercing or a tattoo, or someone in a dating environment made out and their hands wandered. We're coming after you with hellfire. But they're all in the same verses of the Bible that talks about getting drunk, and we'll ignore it. An elder will ignore it. So in closing, in what is a long episode that I could literally have done in 2 parts, probably should have if you're not turning this off by now. When you look at Jehovah's Witness culture and getting drunk, it's worth noting that while we've had some laughs, let's be honest, I have, alcoholism and getting drunk and drinking isn't funny. It's deadly. Deadly to the person addicted to it, and often puts innocent people in danger, whether it's inside the home with family abuse, whether it's drunk driving, whether it's any number of things. Alcohol can be dangerous. It can be wonderful in moderation, a favorite word of Jehovah's Witnesses, but it's oftentimes dangerous. I can tell you that what I witnessed as a Jehovah's Witness with publishers, with elders, and with their wives, it was dangerous. I would often dismiss it just because of my makeup, my personality, because I really see alcohol as something that Jehovah's Witnesses use to mask depression, to mask mental illness, to mask anxiety. It's not a shock. Your life as a Jehovah's Witness revolves around getting up early on a Saturday, putting on a tie or dress, driving into a random neighborhood, knocking on a door and telling people, quote, "I'm right, you're wrong, believe like I do, or Jehovah's going to rain fire down on you and your kids. Have a nice day," end quote. There is nothing normal about that. And so people among Jehovah's Witnesses use alcohol as an escape. And when they're not doing the preaching work verbatim or habitually, they're deprived of life's joys as a Jehovah's Witnesses. Everything from financial stability or education to what you listen to or watch, to your sexuality, to everything about you as a person at the soul level. When a Jehovah's Witness realizes that Holy Spirit is make-believe God magic, they turn to an entirely different spirit just to get through a week, pun intended, or a bad marriage, or boredom, or low self-esteem, or any other number of challenges. It's not any different from Western society as a whole, except for the fact that as a Jehovah's Witness, you're getting endless negative messaging about you as a human being, that you only exist as a witness to get undeserved kindness, that everything you feel and believe doesn't matter. It takes its toll. I have to say here that if you're a Jehovah's Witness listening and this is a problem for you, alcohol, drinking, it may be hereditary, as we've come to learn through science and medicine. But with professional help, many often trace alcoholism and drinking and getting hammered among Jehovah's Witnesses directly back to being a Jehovah's Witness. So, as a faceless guy in a podcast, I can only express my love for you as a total stranger and say, please, please get that help. In my experience watching many Jehovah's Witnesses struggle with alcohol, I could see it was masking depression or something more serious. So again, so much compassion for this issue, despite the laughs, despite my own teenage partying years that I openly shared here. I ask, if you're struggling with it now as a witness in that religion, to please, please get help. But let's say you're a Jehovah's Witness listening, thinking I'm exaggerating what I think is a massive issue in that organization. I can only tell you so many times, and I don't know any other way to say it, please think again. Booze and alcohol and getting hammered has been a problem in that organization for decades, for over a century. I've seen it. I've dealt with it on a very personal level with really good people. In the very least, if you don't have the problem and you're a witness in a congregation and you've stumbled upon this horrible, evil podcast, please consider helping someone that does have the problem. In fact, find it in your heart to stop driving around in circles in a neighborhood on Saturdays, sliding a watchtower under a doormat, to spend that time reaching out to someone that you know is struggling with alcohol. There is a reason they're struggling with alcohol and live in what Jehovah's Witnesses claim is a spiritual paradise among the most loving people on earth, who are refreshed with an endless, endless abundance of spiritual food from the 8 guys in upstate New York. It will truly do your heart good to actually help someone today, not with a message that you're 108 years into the last days of the last days of the last days and your future panda bear awaits, but with a message that you love them. You can see they're struggling and you're there to help today, now. Listen, there is so much I could say on this subject. Had some laughs, got serious there for a few minutes, all from the heart. In my opinion, booze, getting buzzed, tipsy, drunk, hitting the bottle, whatever phrase you want to put to it, is such literally an epidemic among Jehovah's Witnesses in my time, and I've been out for 13 years, I think, that I can't imagine it hasn't gotten worse. But it's such an epidemic that somebody really should be concerned about it. Of course, it raises all the normal questions like, if this is God's one and true only organization, why is everyone drunk? It's a good question. I'm only grateful, turning it around to end on a high note. I'm just grateful we're not all going to the Kingdom Hall buzz and dropping our pants like Noah did. Right? In all seriousness, to me, this is the biggest problem. Probably we'll revisit it in a future episode as well. This one's gone long. But if you're a Jehovah's Witness listening, please, please consider that it's not something to dismiss. There's a reason you feel this way. For those of us that are out, that have our own experiences, I'd love, love, love to hear them. I do my best to answer those via YouTube and on social media. But I can tell you that I view this as something that is very serious, in that organization. And I'm going to cut myself off right there because I'm now repeating myself. As you can tell, I'm just very, very passionate about it. So please, please, please reach out and help somebody. Do it in a practical way. All right. I want to thank everybody here. Thanks for listening. If you made it to the end in what I think is often entertaining when it doesn't hurt anyone, but always serious subject. I hope you are well out there. I'll look forward to everybody else's experiences. Please, please take care of yourself and continue to be well through this, what is a holiday week, a pagan week in the United States. Be safe, and we will see you next week.